It has not operated because of COVID, and we have no plans to continue that tour.
Because of COVID? Because just as recently as last year, you had events scheduled in China. You had to ultimately cancel them because of COVID, but that doesn't sound to me like you suspended your business arrangement.
I would have to check the status of the contract, Senator, but it's my understanding we have no
No,
plans
just wait a minute, though. This is important because you told me just a minute ago when I talked about PGA Tour Series China that wasn't happening, that was gone. But now you're telling me something different. Now you're telling me that, oh no, we still have the business arrangement. Actually, you're hemming and hawing on that. But you're saying we haven't done any events in China. Well, of course not, because of COVID restrictions. You haven't been allowed to. I'm trying to ascertain whether you still have this 20-year agreement.
Welcome back, folks, to the channel. It's YouTube's second hottest golf channel, Jake Span.
And the Asian man.
What is up, folks? We're happy to be back in the system. It has been a grueling past few days. I'm sure you guys have at least tried to watch. It's horrible to try to sit there and watch an entire Senate here.
It was 2 hours and 53 minutes of my life that I'll never get back. But we didn't want to waste it. So in today's episode of Jake Span and the Asian Man, we're going to talk about our favorite points of this 2 hour, 53-minute debacle.
Which, by the way, there were some good spots that happened. Usually it involved one senator trying to go hard in on somebody, and the other person was just like, hey, why are you bothering me? Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, I want you guys to learn this one word. I'm sure most of you already know it, but for the people out there that are in our sub-18 audience, you guys don't know what this word means. It's called fascism. And if you guys don't understand this entire hearing was about fascism, hidden cloak and dagger. But the reality is, it's not about fascism versus capitalism. It's about which version of fascism do you actually like.
I like when Senator Josh Hawley goes off on people. There's actually, if you go to YouTube, and he actually has his own channel where he's just belittling people. Sometimes it's necessary, maybe sometimes it isn't. But yesterday, he focused on COO of the PGA Tour, Ron Price, and asked him some questions regarding filling out the tax form, the Form 990. He then went in on China. Senator Hawley hates China, apparently, finds it revolting. That's not the exact word he uses, but he's not impressed with China. And then he asks COO Ron Price about the Schedule F that you're supposed to fill out if you have these cross-border transactions. Ron Price, don't know, have to look into it. The typical standard answer where you just sit there and take a beating, just keep getting more beat down. Senator Hawley then posted to his YouTube channel, and everyone walks away somewhat happy.
Yeah, well, I mean, these senators, a lot of the times, their goal in these Senate hearings is not actually to do anything. It's just to grandstand for a second and get some type of ability to go back to their constituents or their sponsors and say, look, I went in on this person. See, I went in on this person. And, one of the people that was actually on the committee was Rand Paul. And he was the one senator that I was just like, yes, this dude is a bro, which I've already known he's a bro.
I see no constitutional power that suggests Congress should involve itself in golf.
But he was definitely bro-esque up there yesterday, where he literally just said, guys, this is none of our business. Why are we investigating the PGA Tour merger? It's their own choice. If they want to have an agreement, they're a private entity. They should be allowed to have this agreement without our intrusion into the system. But then Blumenthal, he was like, but you understand, like, we're supposed to do this because of taxes. We have to be able to know how we can tax them. He literally says this. And Rand's like, this isn't our job. This is not our responsibility here. So at least one senator had a brain about that. Now, granted, he wasn't around very much at the time because he just knew it was a waste of time. But that at least got my attention for a moment.
What got my attention initially was how Senator Johnson and Senator Blumenthal came together for a moment, having this bipartisan agreement. Once Senator Johnson had the redacted 9/11 files and was like, you know what, a lot of parts are crossed out here. We need to get to the bottom of this for the 9/11 families who are sitting in the audience. And it made it look like they were going to do something, even though how long have these documents been out there and been redacted?
Well, I mean, they do this all the time. I mean, for instance, today there was actually a file to seal the Pfizer vaccine documents until 2096. 2096. Basically, when all of us are dead that took the vaccine. Thankfully, I did not. Holla at me if you're unvaxxed. But anyway, the point is that they always have these redacted documents they like to throw around and be like, well, you need to give us the real answers or whatever. And I don't know. I really hope that there's never a moment in my life that is so life-defining that I have to parade about that one moment for the rest of my eternity. And that's what I feel and I hate for the 9/11 people, because it's sad how they're being used as pawns. That they have a personal agenda and vendetta that they've latched onto and made their entire identity because it was a defining moment in their life. And yet they're being used as pawns and paraded around and given the front row seats. And they were wearing these awkward reverse MAGA hats. They looked like they were MAGA hats, but they were 9/11 hats, which was weird. I never heard of 9/11 hats.
What's interesting to me and ties into what you just said was how basically these 9/11 families have been focused on this a lot, probably every day. And then you also have to remember Jimmy Dunn's Golf Channel interview where he says every day he thinks about 9/11 because his office, his co-workers, many of them were killed. This is brought up, obviously, during the hearing. And then Jimmy Dunn also, oddly to me, comes up with a quote that I love: sunlight is the best disinfectant. So Jimmy Dunn believes that sunlight is the best disinfectant, but now we're watching out here and we can't get any sunlight in here because we're not getting any clarity on what's going on.
Right. Now, I think in that particular statement, he's more or less just talking about like getting fresh air, getting away from it all is a great way to heal the soul. But at the same time, they're still bringing up, they're still pulling this back into the focus every single 5 minutes. And it just, again, it's just weird how that's literally continually going on. And I get it. There are people that are affected forever because of 9/11. But at the same time, this is 20 years later, and this is golf. This is not opening a flight school in Mecca.
The commonly accepted understanding of sunlight is the best disinfectant is more along the lines, I think, of transparency.
Oh.
You get the sunlight in there, it cleans everything out. And then you have these guys, Ron Price and Jimmy Dunn, who will answer nothing in a straightforward fashion, offer us no sunlight to clean up what is entirely a self-made mess by the PGA Tour at this point, who the whole time is arguing that they were in this horrible situation. You have Senator Johnson jumping in there and constantly saying, hey, they were between a rock and a hard place, and the fact that their reality was so bad that they had to do this. And then he goes on this whole like spiel about, well, it's a win-win situation. And then half the time he's saying, let's emphasize the fact that there's no deal actually made so far. But then later again saying it's a win-win. So it's so bizarre that you can try to frame it as a win-win and then also in the same breath say there's no deal.
Well, it's kind of, it is a win-win because the PGA Tour got a ceasefire, right? What Liv won in the initial agreement is Liv got the upper hand because now the moral high ground is compromised in the PGA Tour. So they got a win there. PGA Tour wins because they get a ceasefire to where they no longer have to pay legal fees or pay for or try to find new ways to entice their players to stay because they have the non-compete clause available now, or at least in place, sort of. So it is a win-win, and Senator Johnson did a great job of trying to be on their side and see it from a business sense like, hey, these dudes were going to lose everything. The lawyers were going to take it all. And they did their best to try and stop the bleeding and regroup. But yet it was weird because the two guys that were there from the PGA Tour, which were the only two guys present, couldn't just say, yes, we are just trying to get things organized and try not to lose everything. And then even weirder, Blumenthal was like, now you're not going to hand the keys over to the Saudi Arabians, are you? And he goes, we will never, ever agree to anything that does not allow the PGA Tour to be 100% in control. And I was like, well, I mean, that's not going to work. Oddly enough, Pants, yeah, I'm sure you recognize this too. 3-hour video talking about golf. Did you notice that there was only one player who actually got shouted out by name?
Mr. Chairman, but I do want to wish the very best of success to Topeka, Kansas' own PGA great Gary Woodland.
I believe you're referring to Gary Woodland.
Yeah, of all the players to get shouted out by name, it was Gary Woodland who got shouted out by name. Kind of surprised me a little bit.
Well, they had another senator refer to Sam Snead as Sammy Snead,
Yeah.
and then he went off his own little spiel as well. But bringing it back to the point of how this was a win for the PGA Tour in terms of getting rid of the litigation, the PGA Tour side, and I guess I would put Senator Johnson on that side, was so proud of them trying to sneak this deal through in the cover of darkness so that the live lawyers apparently didn't want to continue the litigation or weren't unable to, which to me is odd because anytime you have any type of agreement, you want your lawyers to look at it, correct?
Yeah, your lawyers are usually the first person to look at it. Whenever I was started, anytime I've ever done anything in my world, the first person to look at it is your lawyer, your law expert, because they're supposed to help you find, like, hey, these are the situations where if you actually sign this, here's where you're screwed. You're screwed. They're the guys who are paid to find the stupid things buried 800 pages deep in the Apple terms and services.
And people didn't focus at all on the fact that the PGA Tour's legal side is essentially Ed Hurley and his law firm. He's on the board of directors. So there's no conflict of interest there.
I don't know how that works out. I mean, obviously it's helpful to have somebody involved in the law practice because it means that you're going to have somebody who's that's an active interest in making sure they don't screw up. But it does seem a little conflicting and a little bit,
I mean, it's his law firm that is the PGA Tour side for the merger.
Yeah, it's a little too dicey right there. It's one thing to like be a part of the framework and writing of the documents. I don't actually like the person being the representative.
Well, so those legal fees they're complaining about that were sinking their ship were going to Ed Hurley and his law firm.
Yeah, it's a cannibal system essentially, to where he was basically cannibalizing his own entity.
And so essentially at some point he has to say to the PGA Tour, hey, you guys can't run up any more legal fees because you can't afford us anymore.
Well, you know what this really sounds like? This really sounds like creative money laundering.
The Asian man didn't say that.
He didn't, but it smells like it, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, once you go through these guys' books and you have this obvious tax form, the subpart, what is it called? Subpart F, that you have to fill out because you have done millions of dollars of deals with China, as Senator Hawley points out, and you don't have record of that. Like, what other things aren't you properly recording?
Well, here's an even funnier thing: the 3%. 3% of their revenues go to actual charities, and they're classified as a nonprofit. Sheesh, I tithe. Does that mean that I'm a nonprofit too?
Well, the whole system, and I want to get back to it, it's actually Schedule F, not Subpart F, but the whole system is kind of gamed up weird where, as they pointed out, it might have been Blumenthal, that these players themselves don't know, even though it's a member-run organization, they don't know what's going on. They're not, granted access to the decision-making aspects at all. I mean, the whole thing required, to me, Jimmy Dunn's sunlight as being the disinfectant. But what they actually did was do the opposite of providing sunlight. They actually just shoved it under the bed.
Well, even worse, the 276-page document that accompanied the Senate hearing just showcased how long and how much the players were in the dark of the whole entire Shabbat Shalom. It was just ridiculous. I mean, today even, Scotty Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, even Michael Kim, who, is one of our favorite Twitter golfers, he was talking about how, listen, now he mentions no laying up. He said that I'm just going to wait for no laying up's dissemination of the entire event. I'm not going to go watch it, which I understand. It's a 3-hour video, and he's an actual pro golfer. But the fact that these guys who are actually in the PGA Tour have so little information available to them, and we're talking about Scotty Scheffler and Xander Schauffele, big-time players on that tour, and they don't know a dadgum thing. This is alarming for a player-run organization.
And it's interesting that you brought up Xander and Scheffler, because in addition to those two, along with Spieth, they're making quotes now that show a lot of discontent, and that maybe a few more of these top 10 players rise up and start asking questions. Because if we've learned anything from these hearings, because Jimmy Dunn said it over and over again, and he said that there were only a few hundred players, but in reality, there's only 50 players or 20 players that really move the needle. And these guys, they're the centerpieces. They're the centerpieces. They're the ones who are driving, which, the different markets. So they actually have the power. I don't know why they don't realize it yet.
If I was a LeBron James or a Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan more than anything, because he actually has good connections to a lot of these players. A lot of the players that do move the needle are members at 23 Grove, his course. If I was Michael Jordan, I would literally just go to those players and say, listen, you don't know the power that you actually hold in this entire situation. The reason why Live Golf has value, the reason why the PGA Tour has value, is because of you. And the PGA Tour had always been set up in a way to fight back and stop CBAs, collective bargaining agreements that have given the players, like in the NFL and the NBA, so much power over the last few years. So I don't know how we can make that better for the players in that point.
Well, the players have to know on some level that they have the power because they made the elevated events when they met in Delaware. So they have no problem when they're working within the constructs and confines of the PGA Tour to make it a money grab. And as I saw on Twitter today, someone was like, one of the players who weren't at the Delaware meeting going to start turning on the players who were at the Delaware meeting because they're the ones who demanded the inflated purses that basically bled the PGA Tour dry very quickly.
Now, is that Keegan Bradley you're talking about? Because he was talking about openly about how he was pissed that he wasn't at Delaware.
No, it was not Keegan Bradley. I would have remembered that. I have a very steel trap up here.
I
It was a
wasn't
random
saying that,
person.
I know that he was expressing discontent about not being present at Delaware. So, yeah.
Right. So my point is essentially at Delaware, though, they realized they did have power, and suddenly they don't have power anymore.
Well, even more than that, the Netflix documentary series Full Swing. Does Full Swing cover Jimmy Dunn? Does Full Swing cover Jay Monahan?
No.
No, it does not. Full Swing is not about the AT&T CEO. It is not about the CEO of Valspar. It's about the players and trying to give you an insight into their life. The reason why it's successful is because of the what? The players.
Not just the players, the top players. So I want to pivot onto this point because I think you somewhat touched on him. Let's say you have Randall Stevenson. He resigned, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So he made a principled stance and he resigned. In today's culture, maybe back in the day, let's say you don't believe him, but for instance here, let's say we take Randall Stevenson at his word that he had some kind of moral objection. He cannot in good conscience work with the Saudis or what have you, whatever his reasoning was. You do have other companies that are taking odd stances like Bud Light and Target. How do you think this translates moving forward with the sponsors who maybe now might bail because now you have even Randall Stevenson somewhat leading the way? All you need now is a few PGA Tour players to lead the way and say, we're not doing with this. We're not having this.
I don't know how it works out. I know that companies are definitely being a bit more cautious this summer about advertising partnerships and about who they reach out to and who they work with. At least established companies are, especially because of the Dylan Mulvaney issue that destroyed Bud Light. I mean, this is America's beer for like the last 100 years, and it's tanking hard, all because of a poor decision by one VP for a 10-second ad on TikTok. And that whole entire thing has led to this hardcore go woke, go broke movement that's been attacking Bud Light to the point where you could literally, for 4th of July, buy a case of Bud Light and they would pay you for it. And not only that, but then we have the Target issue, like actual Target, the company Target, with the clothing stuff. So I don't know if it's going to be quite that kind of direction, because the wave is more toward the go woke, go broke side, and the PGA Tour really isn't in that rhythm, if that makes sense. There's not really a rhythm one way or the other. It's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. it's basically two camps of conservative politics right there. I feel like, at least. So I don't feel like it's going to be that type of situation, but I can definitely see more sponsors paying attention to at least viewership numbers, attendance numbers, contribution numbers. Hey, you're not putting up a big enough purse from my event. We don't want to be there.
My big takeaway from this whole Senate hearing was Senator Johnson essentially was reading out the PGA Tour talking points.
How they operate. They're a private organization. They have to deal with a complex set of issues in terms of running a league for the benefit of their players and, I would say, for fans. I think things have gotten muddled here.
To Jimmy Dunn and Ron, trying to get them to go along and just say yes, because he was trying to provide them the perfect explanation, the perfect defense. Why do you think Senator Johnson was so invested in bolstering the PGA Tour's side to the point where he was even saying at some points, I suggest we give them time because, you don't do this out in the open to go off and actually make a deal, and then we'll investigate, especially considering, again, I thought sunlight was the best disinfectant.
Well, so interesting enough, Senator Johnson was the only person who mentioned the handicap system. He mentioned the USGA. He mentioned the handicap system. I think Senator Johnson was parlaying himself, or at least trying to push himself to be in a position to look good for a membership at a certain golf club. That's my question mark right there. The conversation points that he was pushing sounded like the dude was trying to simp himself up to an Augusta National, a Seminole GC, some type of high-level club that Jimmy Dunn is actively involved in. Remember, those are elite smoke and mirror clubs and smoke and mirror clubs. Yasir Al-Rahmanian, apparently in one of the negotiation situations, was trying to parlay for a membership in RNA and a membership at Augusta National, which pretty much guarantees he'll never get a membership at Augusta National, because the best way to never get invited to be a member at Augusta National is to ask to be a member at Augusta National.
It's interesting that you bring in Jimmy Dunn and the Seminole aspect, because if you look just less than 6 months ago, Jimmy Dunn was the guy banning live players from Seminole,
Yes.
from the Seminole tournament. So it's amazing, because even in the hearing, he would say, well, I've only been here since January. I don't really know the organization, the system well. But he knows, within the first month or so, immediately no live players.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what was behind that. I don't know if it was... I think that was a move to try and stop preseason recruiting. Basically limit the opportunities that the guys would have in a public setting to cross swords. Even though obviously they all practice at the same clubs. They all play at the same places in the off season, pretty much. I think that was what it was, though. It was kind of a move to limit opportunities for them to speak to sponsors, because a lot of the people that were there that were not the pros were sponsor people that could get you sponsorships, big company CEOs, big company executives. So I think that was a last-ditch effort by Jimmy Dunn to try to keep a top 10 player from getting poached, or a big-time sponsor from coming on before the onset of the deal. That's my thought.
There's an interesting article, I think it's from 2016, about Jimmy Dunn. I think it's titled something along the lines of Truth Without Novocaine, or Honesty Without Novocaine. But then you have this guy, out there for 3 hours, unable to form coherent sentences. And then at some point he's just like, Senator Johnson's trying to softball pitch him again about, how the integrity of the game, and talk about how you love the game. And then Jimmy Dunn's like, you got to dig it out of the dirt.
Which that made no sense.
The whole thing didn't make sense.
That just seemed like the most pro Saudi Arabia statement ever, because they literally do dig their wealth out of the dirt. Because they're oil. I'm being serious. You dig it out of the dirt. Bro, you're about joining up with a company that literally their only value to the world up until recently has been the fact that they sell oil. And he's like, Tiger Woods, he digs it out of the dirt. I'm like, oh, so Tiger Woods did get a shout out then.
Well, it's also interesting because around this point, Jimmy Dunn was being reminded the fact that Tiger Woods, had the integrity to walk away from this money.
Yes.
He had the factor or whatever, the stones to not, betray his morals or his values and not take the money. And then here you have these guys who are praising that, now taking the money.
I just think it's hilarious how they try to paint Tiger as a person of morals. And of course, it's politicians because, they don't know what morals actually are. I mean, they're trying to paint Tiger Woods as a man of morality. No, he's a businessman. He's a very smart businessman. And he looked over the situation at the time with his lawyers and said, this is not the best situation for me right this moment. That's all it was. It wasn't turning down the money. It wasn't morals. It was the right move for him at that moment.
My final big picture takeaway from all of this is just sitting back and watching the PGA Tour now have to take all the talking points that the LIV players had from a year or so ago and field the same questions. And that's essentially, if we bring it back to Senator Hawley, now he's asking him, is there any tour you wouldn't play for? Would you play in Russia? So all you have to do now is watch the old videos and see the same awkward questions that the LIV guys had to field. And now you just pitch them at the PGA Tour, because now without the morality and all that moral high ground stance, they have to field the same questions, and they are humming and hawing and don't have a response.
So kind of like when Hawley was like, do you condemn the treatment of the Uyghurs in China? And he's like, I'm here to talk about the merger with the Saudi Arabian government for golf. And you're talking about Muslim imprisonment camps in China. And which you could tell that guy was just like, Price was just like, why are you asking me this right now? Like, this makes no sense.
You know where Hawley, I think, got that China question from? If you look 2 Februaries ago, Mike Tirico is asking Jay Monahan about, the PGA Tour plays in China. And Jay Monahan, because it was due to the COVID, had stopped playing there. So Tirico keeps saying, will you continue to play in China? And Monahan's like, it's a moot point because COVID. And you just won't answer the question. So then you had COO Ron Price have the same type of questions asked to him, except for the fact that Hawley followed up and said, well, you stopped playing in 2019 because of COVID. And then Ron Price is just sitting there, no answers for anything, more egg on the face. It was just like the wonder duo of incompetence between Dunn and Price.
I will say this, though, because of the fact that Monahan wasn't present, it feels, even though I don't like Monahan, it feels like they're trying to save Monahan and keep him in the game, which is weird because it's like, why would you want him? But because they didn't have him sit there and take that abuse for 3 hours, he looks less poo-poo, even though he still is poo-poo.
Well, I mean, the probably the saving grace is, imagine having Greg Norman, who's done tons of interviews, well-spoken, seems like a true leader. Imagine you had him there and Monahan there, and then you just saw them up front where Greg Norman's able to make coherent points, and then Jay Monahan will just be like, it's a moot point. That guy never answers a question straightforward. Completely worthless in interviews.
Here's a question for you. Why does Greg Norman look more and more like Crocodile Dundee each year?
I think it's because we associate that hat. If he just had that kind of Greg Norman hat that was instead leather with a couple of alligator bones in it, it's Crocodile Dundee, dude.
Dude, especially like how fit he is. Like he's so jacked for his age. Like he could probably just take the cutoff shirt and make Crocodile Dundee 4 right now if he wanted to.
Greg Norman is living to 115 at this point.
Seriously, that dude he's in shape, man. Like you hear his age and you're just like, but Nick Faldo looks like he's not doing so hot. And then you look at Greg Norman and Greg Norman's like, whatever, let's go lift weights and play golf today.
Nick Faldo looks like how sausage feels.
Ooh, uncooked sausage. Ooh, that was rough, folks. This was an absolute brutal beatdown of just 3 hours to even watch this thing, but there were some good points, the ones that we made. I'm sure there were others out there, but if you find them, let us know in the comments below.
Folks, subscribe to Jake Spann and the Asian Man.
Questions that people ask me about, why aren't we investigating them? I don't see have any of this as prudent to the daily lives of American working families who are paying twice as much for groceries and gasoline than they were 2 years ago. Many of you said that the LIV organization is the Saudis' way of sports washing, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that.